I hadn't resided with my mother for quite some time. Departing her side in pursuit of knowledge and affection, a spirited 25-year-old, she had dwelled with my aunt in a modest abode at the terminus of Dolphin Street. I say dwelled with, but it resembled more a caregiver-patient arrangement than anything else. My aunt battled a severe case of COPD. She could scarcely muster the strength to leave the couch for the restroom, and the mere notion of venturing outside triggered panic attacks, rendering her breathless. She perpetually gasped for air, poor soul. Her passing brought a degree of solace. Even during my visits, the impending specter of her demise loomed, much like the sword of Damocles dangling perilously overhead. Finally, it had descended. Thankfully, death never seized me as it does most. It's not that I didn't grieve their absence. Quite the contrary. However, at some juncture in my life, perhaps during my adolescence, though the precise moment eludes me, I began to perceive the fallacy in people's perception of death. Many view death as inherently negative. I recall attending my grandmother's funeral at 17, where the preacher asserted that death was unnatural and only divine intervention could secure eternal bliss. What nonsense! Death is entirely natural. Throughout history, every individual has met their end. You live, and then you die, and that's the conclusion. By all means, mourn their departure, but ultimately, don't lament the very fact of their demise. I understand this may sound somewhat callous. It's not my intention. Don't misunderstand me. I miss my aunt profoundly. She was among the few family members who didn't regard me as a bother during my childhood. She'd roll up to family gatherings in her Jeep, blaring Kiss or Van Halen from her stereo. She'd embark on her morning runs before her ailment took its toll. I recall spending nights at her place, rising at dawn to join her on her run. Once a vibrant, active woman, she was reduced to a mere shadow of herself in the end. To me, death seemed a gentler fate. After my aunt's funeral and the sale of the house, my mother secured a cozy apartment closer to town. It was a decent enough abode, a tight-knit community of identical units spanning 2 streets. Inside, a living area, a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom. Sufficient amenities for a single woman in her 50s. Upon my initial visit, I noticed that Peaceful Meadows Cemetery lay within view through her kitchen window, separated from the apartment complex by a simple wooden fence. It wasn't the grandest cemetery one could encounter, far less extensive than the Veterans Burial Ground off Colonial Avenue or the Ancient Towers Cemetery off 40th Street. Gray tombstones of various sizes and shapes adorned the verdant expanse, spanning at least 2 city blocks. On one side, it was bordered by a thicket of woods, while on the other lay a steep embankment. Altogether, it presented itself as a modest and humble final resting place. Whenever I visited my mother, I made it a ritual to stop by Peaceful Meadows. On my initial stroll through, I observed that despite Highway 19 running alongside the cemetery's entrance, once inside, the clamor of traffic and nearby construction faded away. All that remained was the melodious chirping of birds or serene silence, not the unsettling silence that raises goosebumps, but a tranquil one. Wandering amidst the tombstones felt like entering another realm, one devoid of human strife, replaced by a silent tribute to the past. Perusing the headstones, I noticed some dated back to the early 1900s. These individuals were now mere memories. The living are multifaceted beings, capable of both virtue and vice, kindness and cruelty, joy and sorrow. They embody a whirlwind of desires, needs, aspirations, and longings, often overshadowed by criticism, in my experience. The deceased, however, have shed all earthly desires, finding true serenity. No one dares castigate the departed, though in my view, it's a tad hypocritical. Such contemplations often occupied my mind as I wandered, clearing dirt and foliage from the weathered gravestones, tracing my fingers over the engraved names and dates etched into their surfaces. I'd bring along a book and read aloud beside the grave of a child. I imagined they hadn't enjoyed many bedtime stories. It might seem futile since the child couldn't hear the tale or comprehend it, even if alive, but it felt like a consoling gesture nonetheless. To my surprise, I stumbled upon my aunt's resting place, nestled between my grandmother and great-grandparents. Having spent several months visiting my mother at her newfound abode and the adjacent cemetery, I developed a fondness for the place. It became customary for me to greet Edna, 1924 to 1981, the first tombstone along my path to Peaceful Meadows. I'd often read a passage from Harry Potter to Timmy, 1997 to 2000, whose grave was adorned with a resin photo of a boy resembling the protagonist. Before concluding my visit, I'd tenderly clean the headstones of my kin, and when possible, leave flowers as a gesture of remembrance. Over time, I became acquainted with many denizens near my mother's dwelling. A gnarled pine tree overlooking a stone bench at the rear of the graveyard became my sanctuary. There, amidst the gentle autumn breeze, I'd spend hours researching the lives of those interred. Howard Salinger, 1946 to 1988, perished in a tragic car accident returning from a vacation in Massachusetts. Mary Ernest, 1987 to 2017, met her demise choking on birthday cake. Jonathan Ellis, 1904 to 1978, succumbed to congestive heart failure. While others might perceive these deaths as morbid, to me, they were merely the final chapter of individual narratives, a natural conclusion. However, my perception shattered on the night of September the 4th. It had begun like any other day. Following a leisurely lunch and a stroll through the flea market with my mother, she retired for a nap while I ventured to Peaceful Meadows. Engaging in my customary routine, I shared excerpts from Harry Potter with Timmy, nearing the climax of Goblet of Fire. As twilight painted the sky in hues of violet pink, I bid farewell and returned to my mother's abode. After a brief shower, I reclined on the living room chair, my usual sleeping spot during visits. Drifting into slumber, I was abruptly roused by rustling outside the apartment. Initially dismissing it as remnants of a vivid dream, the persistent noise compelled me to investigate. "Dan animals," I muttered, recalling Florida's nocturnal visitors, raccoons or possums. As I approached the door, the handle began to jiggle. I stood frozen, witnessing the golden knob sway gently back and forth. If not for the lock, the door might have swung open, and I harbored no illusions about the nocturnal visitors that awaited. The drapes veiled the window overlooking the front entrance, shrouding the lurking figures outside. Yet, I hesitated to peer through the glass, fearing they could somehow reach through and seize me. My mind raced. Should I awaken my slumbering mother? But she remained oblivious in the adjacent room. Any lapse in vigilance, and the doorknob could yield to unwanted intrusion. "Get a grip," I admonished myself. The rattling intensified, jolting me like a slap to the face. Acting swiftly, I lunged for the switch beside the door, illuminating the exterior. Hushed murmurs emanated from beyond. Then, as abruptly as it began, the handle fell silent. I lingered, hand still on the light switch, tension palpable in the air. Exhaling heavily, I felt beads of sweat forming on my brow. The notion of rousing my mother or summoning the authorities flirted with my thoughts. Yet, I hesitated, dismissing the commotion as perhaps mischievous neighborhood youths or a confused neighbor's nocturnal wanderings. Didn't Mom recount a similar incident a fortnight prior? A tipsy neighbor mistaking her door for theirs. A nervous chuckle escaped me, mingled with a sense of foolishness. I extinguished the front light and retreated beneath the covers of the recliner, enveloped in an uneasy silence punctuated only by the hum of the fan. Despite my efforts, rest eluded me, my mind ensnared in a relentless cycle of doubt. Should I wake Mom and relay the incident? But what could I possibly tell her? A drunken intruder attempting entry again? What if it wasn't mere confusion? What if it was a genuine threat, someone intent on breaching our sanctuary? But why would anyone seek to breach it? The final inquiry was indeed logical. The realm of affluence remained a distant concept for my family. with my mother dedicated to the humble vocation of waitressing, a lineage of labor etched by generations past. Our financial stance leaned profoundly towards modesty. The apartment complex mirrored this simplicity, its unembellished, ivory facades and neatly trimmed shrubbery painting a picture far removed from opulence, yet not descending into destitution. But what if their motive extended beyond mere monetary gain? My restless psyche conjured unsettling images of crimson-stained linens, lifeless forms sprawled on the floor, and the ominous glow of police sirens seeping through drawn blinds. Eventually, I relented, stirring from my reverie with a grunt. The hour neared 1 in the morning. Casting off the covers, I embarked on a nocturnal journey to the kitchen in pursuit of a midnight reprieve. As I rounded the corner into the culinary domain, two shadowy figures, their visages contorted into grotesque semblances, loomed at the threshold of the rear entrance. I blinked, grappling with the surreal juxtaposition of reality and the haze of exhaustion. Yet, despite repeated attempts to clear my vision, the eerie figures persisted in their unsettling presence. Clad entirely in ebony attire, a somber ensemble of black turtlenecks, jeans, and shoes, they exuded an aura of ominous intent. Upon closer scrutiny, I discerned that their distorted countenances were not organic, but rather masked. The taller of the two, positioned at the forefront, donned a peculiar visage resembling a bleached caricature of a familiar political figure, while his diminutive accomplice sported a Dracula mask secured with a single string, accentuated by cascading auburn locks. "What is your purpose?" I ventured, my query tinged with an air of incredulity. The words felt feeble, as if the appropriate response eluded me amidst the fog of disbelief. Surely, this must be a dream, I rationalized. The sole explanation for the outlandish spectacle before me. A glimmer of metallic sheen caught my eye. The taller figure brandished a diminutive switchblade, no longer than a few inches. Instinct propelled my body into action, outpacing the sluggish machinations of my mind. With a surge of adrenaline, I recoiled and bolted towards my mother's chamber. A fleeting grasp seized my wrist. It told tenuous enough for me to slip free at the 11th hour. A fleeting motion grazed my periphery as I stumbled into my mother's sanctuary, slamming the door shut in my wake. "Mom," I called out, securing the entrance with trembling hands. No sooner had I done so than the door convulsed violently. "Mom, summon the authorities." A moist sensation trickled down my arm, prompting me to inspect the source. As my fingers brushed the damp surface, a sticky crimson residue coated my skin, illuminated by the faint glow of my mother's bedside lamp. It ignited a primal panic within me. Though devoid of pain for the moment, the sight of my own blood seemed to herald an ominous premonition. "You are in mortal peril." "Mom," I called out once more, met with silence, not even a hint of movement. My gaze shifted towards her form, reassured by the subtle rhythm of her breathing. The door collided with my head, sending a painful jolt through me. "What do you want?" I cried out, the pounding ceasing abruptly. My heart raced, sweat beading on my brow, chilling my skin. Blood trickled down my arm, pooling at my fingertips before dripping in heavy droplets. A voice, strangely clear despite the barrier, whispered through the door, sending a shiver down my spine. "Fun." A lump formed in my throat as the door rattled with increased intensity. In that moment, all I could comprehend was that this might be the end. Death, a topic often avoided or dismissed until it's too late, now confronted me head-on. Despite any semblance of readiness, the reality blindsided me, leaving my thoughts scattered and disjointed. Instinctively, I pressed my body against the door, a primal response. Casting a glance back at my mother, I observed a figure leaning over her. Blinking, I struggled to process the sight before me. The boy, approximately 3 years old, with tousled black hair obscuring his face, murmured into my mother's ear. Puzzled, I squinted, noting his ethereal appearance, as if light would pass right through him. "Who?" I whispered, barely audible over the pounding on the door. The boy's gaze snapped towards me, gesturing for silence before returning his attention to my mother, his spectral form sharing secrets in hushed tones. A fleeting realization dawned upon me. The familiarity of the boy struck a chord within me. It was Timmy, seemingly lifted from his tombstone portrait. My breath hitched, freezing in my chest. Swiftly, I pivoted, wrenching open the door, and bolted back inside. Yet, as I crossed the threshold, realization struck me like a thunderbolt. A piercing scream shattered the air, jolting me backward as if propelled by its force. Panic surged through me as I fumbled in the darkness, my eyes settling on a towering figure bathed in dim light. A man stood before me, his back turned, clad in overalls and a cap, yet oddly transparent like Timmy. Dracula, pressed against the wall, their mask askew, struggled under the ghostly man's grasp. With grim determination, he tightened his hold, revealing the obscured features beneath Dracula's mask. Across the room, Trump lunged at a spectral woman, clad in loose attire, plunging the blade deep into her chest. The surreal sight of the gleaming blade buried within her misty form sent shivers down my spine. With a strained cry, she withdrew the blade, advancing towards Trump, who stumbled and fell to the tiled floor. As I watched, transfixed, the translucent woman turned, her long blonde locks framing her face. Recognition dawned. It was my aunt. A fleeting smile graced her lips, a silent greeting, before she gestured towards my mother's bedroom. I hesitated, absorbing the scene, before retreating into my mother's room and shutting the door. When dawn broke, I found myself sprawled on the recliner, half expecting to encounter the lifeless forms of Dracula and Trump in the kitchen. However, as I turned the corner, the kitchen lay pristine, basking in the morning sunlight streaming through the window. A dull ache emanated from my arm, drawing my attention to a shallow scratch etched along its length, raised and pale against my skin. A chuckle bubbled within me, realizing it had all been a mere dream, perhaps just a consequence of an unconscious scratch. Upon my mother's awakening, I cautiously inquired if she had noticed any peculiar occurrences during the night, any unusual noises or disturbances. Her response, claiming to have slept like a baby, sent a shiver coursing down my spine as I recalled Timmy's spectral presence at her bedside, whispering softly into her ear. As the day unfolded, the remnants of the dream gradually dissipated. It was a crisp autumn day, heralding the impending arrival of winter. Following a leisurely lunch with my mother, we returned home, and I embarked on my customary pilgrimage to Pleasant Meadows. Inhaling deeply, I welcomed the brisk air, relishing the warmth of the sun caressing my skin. Engaging in my routine, I exchanged greetings with Mr. Ellis and tended to the upkeep of Mrs. Jensen's resting place. Approaching Timmy's grave, I offered a brief salutation, though I dared not linger too long, for the memory of the dream lingered like an unwelcome specter, too intense to confront directly. Despite my rationalizations, the lingering sense of obligation compelled me to promise Timmy a return visit with Harry Potter. As I concluded my rounds within the cemetery, the radiant afternoon sun cast a gentle warmth upon my neck. Yet, as I journeyed towards my final destination, my aunt's grave, a subtle change in the atmosphere caught my attention. Two objects, draped in white, adorned the tombstone, drawing me inexorably closer. With each step, a palpable chill gripped me, sending prickles along my skin and stealing the air from my lungs. Approaching the gray tombstone, the objects came into sharper focus, eliciting a surge of cold dread within me. Suspended on either side hung a white-painted Trump mask and a plastic Dracula mask, casting a haunting aura over the sacred ground.